It is. Get up and the pizza's late, but it smells really good. I think it's started a good discussion here in Community School of Architecture, UT Austin. You all for a second. This graduate research assistant. I forgot to mention it later. We're recording these to post later on to our channel. So for people who couldn't be here today or people in other places. But we'll turn off the recording during Q&A and discussion. So just so everyone knows that. So City Forum is a planning and urban issues speaker series coordinated program. The series is really intended to provide a space for open, critical dialogue issues in Austin and elsewhere, and to encourage discussion of diversity, multiple. All participants are welcome. It's really nice to see some faces from the community itself. So thank you all for being here. We have food, first come, first serve, sometimes at 12:10, sometimes a little before, but it will be here eventually. And I also want to ask you, we're hosting two forum events on October 4th, which is also Friday at noon. Dr. Marla Toronto is coming back to campus. She's a graduate of our planning, both her master and her PhD programs. She's currently division manager at the City of Austin's Housing Department. And she's going to be presenting on anti-displacement work happening here in Austin and trying to kind of draw parallels to work in other places around the U.S. And then on Friday, November 15th, author and journalist Megan Kimball is going to be here, which is called City Limits, Infrastructure, Inequality, and the Future of American Highways. So we're really, I think, lucky this semester to have two book authors. So we're recognized by the community and sponsored by UT Austin's Planet Texas 2015. On community and ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change and rapid population growth, and the co-design of adaptive strategies with frontline communities and other partners across Texas and beyond. So thank you all for your sponsorship for today. And finally, I am so excited to introduce Jeff, speaker for today. Jeff is an author and journalist, and today he will be speaking about his book, The People on a Scorched Earth. Also named Best Book. Previous books, including the remaking of the Blood CRP's City Forum. Jeff was a 2015 New America Fellow. So thank you so much for being here and speaking today.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for everyone who helped put this together. Thank you all for coming. This may be like the perfect talk conditions for me. Hot day, pizza, Austin. I mean, so I'm really happy to do this. I'll talk a little bit about the book, about what I wanted to write about in the book, why I wrote it, how I wrote it a little bit, some of the main ideas of the book. And then I'm happy to just have a conversation with you about anything that you would like. It's great having a conversation with people who understand this subject as well as anyone. I wrote this, I live in Austin. I wrote the book at my house 10 blocks away from here. So it's very Texas-infused, shall we say. So in fact, speaking of that, this is one of my favorite things, if that clicker works. There we go. So a couple of months ago, I was at the bookstore at at the airport here. And I was, of course, doing what every writer does, which is go to see if their own book is in the bookstore, which is what every writer does, if they tell you that or not. And it was. I was very happy. But I didn't take any pictures of that. But I saw this book, which I thought was so great. So one of the complexities of talking about heat is just the way we think about heat, right? And the idea of, is heat good? Is it bad? How, the whole language of talking about heat. And one of the things my book tries to do is kind of disentangle that and challenge you to think about heat in a different way. But this embodies it perfectly for me. So this little fun book, Austin is Cool, and you flip through it, and it's all the cool taco places and Continental Club and where to go and ACL and all that kind of stuff, and it's about what a cool city Austin is. And then I walked out and, oops, get this clear. And on the wall, right across from the bookstore is Austin, Texas, hot music, hot temps, hot you. So this embodies the kind of dilemma of thinking about, talking about, understanding this climate change in general and heat in particular. Is this, well, wait, is Austin cool or is it hot? And is it good if it's hot or is it not good if it's hot? I thought hot was good. And wait, no, it's better if it's cool. It's like a very, what is the word, dialectic, I think is the right word from graduate school, that as I vaguely recall, here, that is embodied in exactly this. I'm going to get these clicker buttons working the right way. So one of the challenges of my book is to, I try to look at this question of heat on two levels. One is like what it means for you personally. That's why I called the book The Heat Will Kill You First, which my publisher was like, no freaking way are you calling your book The Heat Will Kill You First. I'm like, oh, come on, it's a really good idea. And they're like, no, it's not. No one will buy that book. You are not calling it The Heat Will Kill You First. But I had this long fight with my publisher, and I obviously won. And you can obviously decide for yourself whether you think it's a good idea or not. But the reason I called it that was because I think a lot of the talk about climate change in general, not just about heat, but in general, is so distant. It's like about future generations, about what kind of world we're going to leave to our kids. It's about brown people in other places. It's about glaciers that you'll never see melting. It's all this stuff that feels like, yeah, I'm a good person, I care about this, or maybe you're not a good person, you don't give a shit about it. But for most people, it's this sort of like distant hum in their lives. And I really wanted it to be personal. I really wanted to challenge you to think about this in a different way and to understand that this is a risk to your own life and that this has implications for you in a very personal way. And one of the first ideas and most important ideas in the book is this idea of a Goldilocks zone, which I actually got from talking to some astrophysicists, I think is the right word, here at UT, which is about the idea of when you're looking for life on other planets, what you're looking for is the presence of liquid water, right? And so that means the planet can't be, because liquid water is a precursor for life in many ways. So you're looking for places not too cold, right? If it's cold, it's all ice. If it's hot, like Venus or something, it's all evaporated away. So planets that have potential for life are in what these astrophysicists call the Goldilocks zone. And this is a very useful concept for thinking about climate change and for thinking about heat, and it's one that I lean on heavily in the book. Because one of the arguments I'm making is that as our climate heats up, as it gets hotter and hotter and we get more intense weather systems, we are moving out of our Goldilocks zone. We have evolved well, first of all, everyone knows that the last 10 years, I just want to underscore the moment of this. Last year was the hottest year on record that humans have experienced. Last 10 years have been the hottest on record before that, right? And it looks like 2024 is going to be hotter than 2023. So we're on this sort of escalating staircase. But what's really important is this idea of human civilization evolved into this particular Goldilocks zone, in this particularly stable, relatively cool, given the history of the Earth, climate. And the problem is not that like the planet, everyone always says save the planet. Well, the planet is going to be fine, right? The problem is us and everything that we built is built for this relatively narrow temperature range. And what's happening is it's getting really hot really fast, 100 times faster than we have any records in geologic history of heat increasing. And it's happening because we're burning a lot of fossil fuels. 70, 80% of the CO2, man-made CO2 emissions are from fossil fuels. There's, of course, other things, agriculture and things, but this is primarily an issue of burning fossil fuels. And so the problem that we have, what's the big picture here is we are moving out of the Goldilocks zone. We are moving out of a temperature range that we have evolved to be kind of stable in, and that all other life forms have evolved in this same, that we know, have evolved in a similar kind of period. And just as importantly, especially for you who are thinking about planning and architecture and things like that, all the things we built have been built with the assumption that we are going to be living in this particular range of temperatures. And we are radically and quickly moving out of that. And that's the fundamental problem that we're talking about here. And so the book goes in, looks at this from sort of two angles, really. One is the very personal angle of what heat does to your body. Everybody knows, a heat stroke, heat exhaustion. But what does that really do? What does that really mean? And why is it really dangerous? And so the book goes into that in some detail. I was very proud that one reviewer called the book sort of like a horror novel. And the only word that I was offended by was the novel part of it, because it's not fictional. But I really wanted to give a grisly sense of what happens to your body when you overheat. And the first chapter of the book is about just a little insight into the editorial process. So I first turned in the book, the first chapter of the book was about the Big Bang and the sort of origin of heat in the universe. I turned it in and I got another one of these calls from my editor, which was like, no, we are not starting the book with the Big Bang. I'm sorry, we're not doing 50 pages of the evolution of the universe to begin this book. That is not how your book is starting. And don't you have any other ideas? And so what the idea, which I think is very effective and very powerful, again, you can judge it for yourself, but I write about a family, this family here, who in 2021 moved to the Sierras in California to get away from Silicon Valley. They were both he worked in the at Snapchat, and they wanted to get kind of closer to nature. Pandemic, they wanted to get out of the urban areas. So they moved into the foothills of California, not far from Yosemite, and had just bought this house, and were every weekend doing various hiking adventures to explore the world around them and explore their neighborhood kind of thing. And this one day, on a hot day in July, it was about not that hot by Texas standards, maybe 102, I think, that day. They went for a 10-kilometer, so 6-mile hike down into a canyon to a river where they wanted to go for a swim, and then up, and then about 3 miles up this hillside back to their car. And they told their friends and family they're going for this hike. They went with their child and their dog. They didn't come home, and their friends and family got worried. They sent a search party out. The entire family, sadly, tragically, including the dog, were found dead on the trail, halfway up this mountain coming off the river. And it was the reason I learned about it, I was working on the book, and it was headlines. This family found, because I grew up in the Bay Area, I kind of pay attention to California news. Family found dead on the trail. What happened? There was all this theory about, was it carbon monoxide poisoning? Was it some kind of terrible family suicide thing? What could have killed this family? They found them all just laying on the trail, the dog, everything right there. And like, what happened? And it took them a month, the sheriff's department, a month to figure out that they all died of heat stroke. They all died of extreme heat climbing out of this canyon on a hot day where because there was a fire there 2 years earlier, there was no shade. There was only barren sticks of black trees. So I write about this in some detail in the book in the opening because I really wanted to show that heat can be dangerous for everyone, not just the people that, if you think about it at all, you imagine, like outdoor workers, people working on rooftops, farm workers out on hot days, older people in hot apartments who don't have air conditioning. All these people are sort of obviously at risk for extreme heat. I really wanted to underscore the everyman and every person risks of extreme heat. And this story of this family did that. So in the book, then I talk about how heat affects your body and how important a baseline temperature is to all your metabolic functions. You all know that. You get sick, what is the first thing the doctor does? What is your temperature, right? If your temperature is up 2 degrees, that's a big deal. Something's wrong, right? So our body it's really important for our bodies to maintain this thermal equilibrium in our bodies. And it does it automatically, right? You don't think about it. You don't think, oh, I'm going to regulate my temperature a little bit now. It's part of it's a deep part of your sort of brain that regulates this. And we all know what the heat dumping mechanism we have is, which is sweat, right? It's a really cool thing. We're the only animals, horses aside, with some different kinds of sweat, but we're basically the only animals that sweat to release heat. And it's very different than like a dog, right? You think about a dog. When a dog runs around on a hot day, they run around, and then they all of a sudden pant and go into the shade or go to water, and they have to lay there until their body temperature, until they cool off, and then they can go run around and play Frisbee again, and then they lay down, but we can keep going because we can dump sweat as we move and dump heat as we move by sweating. And this was a huge evolutionary advantage. We could hunt animals that needed to take sweat breaks because we could keep moving. So it was a really key evolutionary trait that gave us huge advantage in the sort of long stretch of history. But it only works so well, right? It can only dump so much heat. So in the book, I go into great detail about how the system works, what happens when your body starts to overheat, your heart starts pounding. You all have probably felt this. Your heart starts pounding. It's pushing blood out to your surface of your skin so that when you sweat, it pulls the heat out of that blood, cools your blood, and your blood recirculates through. And by the way, this is an important point. This is why drinking water is important on hot days. Drinking water is not important because it's like a liquid coolant. The drinking of water does not cool your body off. What drinking water does is allow you to sweat. But there's a big myth out there that people think, oh, I can go out and hike on a 120-degree day as long as I have water. Well, no. There's a lot of stories about people who die with plenty of water because you can only sweat so much and you can only dump out so much heat. So water in itself will not save you. It's important to have water in hot conditions because if you stop sweating and you get dehydrated, then you're really in trouble. But water in itself is not a coolant, okay? So that's just a little thing. But I go into a lot of detail about what happens to your body, and I won't go into it all right now. But basically what happens when your body overheats, when it gets to be, your body temperature gets to about 103, 104, is you start hemorrhaging inside. The actual cell membranes in your body melt. You literally melt from the inside. It's really kind of horrific way to go, and I do not recommend it to any of you. I talk a lot about, I talk about heat for humans as a predatory force, right? So by that I mean it goes after more of the most vulnerable people first, whether it's outdoor workers, whether it's people in poorly insulated apartments with no air conditioning or malfunctioning air conditioning or air conditioning they can't afford to run, young children whose sweat glands are not fully developed, pregnant women, people on various kinds of drugs, and not like recreational drugs, I mean like various kinds of medicine interfere with your thermal regulatory system. So there is a kind of difference between a 70-year-old person who has a heart condition and a 22-year-old marathoner, right, in their vulnerability to heat. And it really is predatory. It really does take out the weakest and most vulnerable first. I felt this very powerfully. In my book, I have a whole chapter about a man named Sebastian Perez, who was a worker at a nursery in Oregon, farm worker who came up from Guatemala, was trying to make money to save. He had just gotten married. He wanted to make some money to save and go back to Guatemala and build a house for his wife. And he had worked a lot in heat. He knew heat very well. He was from Guatemala. But he was working in this nursery, and it was a hot day during the heat wave of 2021. And I learned all this later from talking to his friends and things. Basically, it was a hot day. He was working really hard outside. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if he asked for shade breaks or water breaks, he would be fired, right? So he did what many people who are in these kinds of vulnerable jobs and stuff do. They make a gamble. You know, I need my money, I need my job. I can't afford to like make a big deal about taking a break. I can't go sit under a tree. I can't ask my boss for water. I'm just going to keep working, and I know I'm tough and I'm going to make it. Well, Sebastian Perez did not make it. And this is a picture I took. I went to where he died a few days later, and that's his hat and his water jug. Again, example of the water will not save you. But what's interesting about this picture is I went to the site where he died. It was actually quite beautiful place in Oregon. And it was a very hot day when I was there. And I went to the site, and I took my phone out of my pocket to take the picture, and I couldn't because it said, your iPhone is overheated. So in order to take this picture, I had to go back to the car, sit there with the air conditioning on for 20 minutes with my phone by the air conditioning, and then go back out and take the picture, which is not just a kind of amusing anecdote. It's an example of, again, how not just us and all living things, but our infrastructure, our technology, our world is not built for these kinds of extreme temperatures. The second big thing about heat that I wanted to underscore in the book is that it's the engine of planetary chaos, right? We think about climate change, we think about sea level rise, we think about droughts, we think about bigger storms, wildfires, all these things. Yes, those are all impacts and aspects of climate change, but they're all driven by heat. The reason there are bigger, more intense storms is because the oceans are hotter, because our atmosphere is hotter. The reason we're getting bigger, more intense wildfires is because the forests are drier, because it's been hotter. You know, all of these impacts of these things of climate change that we think about are actually secondary impacts of heat. And so I really wanted to underscore that. Obviously, fires is one example. You know, I spent a lot of time in the Rio Grande Valley looking at food crops there. You know, just like us, just like everything else, corn has a Goldilocks zone. And when you get out of that Goldilocks zone, the corn dies, just like every other plant. And you either have to come up with a new genetic strain of corn or whatever other crop you want to talk about, or you have to move to a cooler place, right? But there are thermal limits for our food supply, and this is a big, big deal when we think about the future of a hotter planet. Another big aspect of this that is particularly relevant here to Texas is changes in disease patterns, right? So one of the things that happens what every animal does when their Goldilocks zone starts changing is they say, hey, it's too hot, I got to get out of here. So they migrate, right? Frogs move higher up the mountain, or fish swim to cooler parts of the ocean. Everybody, that's what humans move to different places if they don't have air conditioning, all that. But historically, humans have moved with climate, right? All animals do that. They have to they either need to find their Goldilocks zone or they die, right? They can't survive outside of it. So one of the animals that's really good at this is mosquitoes, right? They are very good at moving into new areas as temperatures change. One example of this is Mexico City, where my wife is from. I spend a lot of time there. And Mexico City has this sort of really wonderful, has always had this really wonderful climate that is just cool enough so that mosquitoes can't really thrive there. Nobody has screens, nobody thinks about mosquitoes, there's no mosquito-borne diseases. Now, because Mexico City is warming up, mosquitoes are moving in. And all of a sudden, things that mosquitoes bring along with them, like dengue, Zika, malaria, things like that, are people in Mexico City, one of the largest cities in the world, are at risk. We're seeing the same thing here, right? We've seen, I spent some time in Houston with the mosquito control people, looking at Zika and dengue, the mosquitoes that are carrying that. We've seen first cases of malaria on the Gulf Coast in decades again because of the movement. Dr. Fauci, right? The disease guru. I'm a huge Fauci fan, so if we want to get in a fist fight about Fauci, we can, but I'm a huge Fauci fan. He just got out of the hospital for West Nile virus, a disease that is carried by mosquitoes, and these mosquitoes are migrating to new places, and things like West Nile virus are appearing in places they never had before. This has huge implications. In Africa, where malaria is a very big problem and kills about 400,000 people a year, you're seeing these mosquitoes moving to new places, making whole new swaths of people vulnerable to malaria, and in fact, in some cases, saving people because the mosquitoes are kind of going away. But it's changing these patterns. And one of the things I talk about in the book is not only the vector-borne diseases like mosquitoes and ticks, but also it's highly likely that the next pandemic is going to come out of what disease experts call a meet cute, which is, maybe you know from the term for romantic comedies, where you have somebody's walking down the aisle and a cute woman is walking down the aisle and a cute guy bumps into her cart and they spill milk. They reach down to pick up the milk and they fall in love, right? And that's the meet cute. And every screenwriter has to figure out a meet cute for a Hollywood romance. Well, the same thing is happening with animals as they move around. You're having meet cutes with bats carrying new viruses that are moving to new places, and having meet cutes with deer that are then these viruses and pathogens are jumping into new species in which they can propagate in new ways. And virtually every disease expert I talk to suggests that is one of the most likely channels for a new pandemic, is through this cross-pollination of migrating animals moving because their climate is changing. So this has huge implications for us all. This is a picture of a ship I was on in Antarctica. I went to Antarctica for this book, which might seem strange. It's a very cold place, you might imagine. And why would I go there? Well, I went there because I wanted to talk about how even tiny changes in temperatures have huge implications. So the temperature in the Southern Ocean there has warmed 1 degree Fahrenheit, which is almost nothing. Of course, it's hardly noticeable. But because of that 1 degree warming, the warmer water is getting underneath. This is the Thwaites Glacier, the biggest glacier, not the biggest glacier in Antarctica, but probably the most important glacier in Antarctica, which is sort of the cork for the whole West Antarctic ice sheet. And what's happening is as the water raises 1 degree, it's getting underneath the grounding line, what they call the ice sheet, and causing it to melt from below. So there's a whole new range of risk for sea level rise, which was what my previous book was about, as a result of a 1 degree change in the temperature of the Southern Ocean. And the West Antarctic ice sheet, which you're seeing the front of there, has 10 feet of sea level, a global sea level rise in that ice sheet. And this 1 degree change in temperature is destabilizing that ice sheet from below. And I can talk more about that if you want, but it was also an amazing adventure. This was a photo taken by a drone, and it really begins to show the scale of these ice sheets in Antarctica. And then, of course, we go back to the movement of people. This is something that is all of us here know all too much about, something that's driving all of politics, because when we think about climate change and heat, we think about these sort of direct impacts, but there's also these larger political impacts, right? I mean, migration being one of them. I could argue that for, kind of strongmen type leaders, especially the orange man who's running for president right now, chaos is a good thing, right? The kind of chaos makes it necessary to build walls and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of political implications to the rising chaos that is driven by this more extreme, more chaotic climate that we're living in. So the last part of this is the no, we are not doomed part, because everybody wants to ask, everybody says in every talk I ever give, are we doomed or are we not? And we are not doomed, okay? It's very simple. It's like yes, no question, we are not doomed. The whole idea of that that there's some kind of global tipping point that's sort of encouraged by the IPCC targets of 1.5 and 2C warming that suggests that there's these thresholds. There is not a threshold where it's like, okay, to hell with it, let's just go to Barton Springs and bring a bunch of tequila and like watch the sun go down because we're all doomed. That's not how it works, right? There are tipping points in our system for the West Antarctic ice sheet, which I showed you. There's tipping points for the Amazon. There's tipping points for the insurance industry. There are tipping points in the system, but there are not tipping points for the planet and for human civilization. So let's get that really clear. We are seeing amazing progress. Again, Texas is a great example of it in things like renewable energy, right? Texas is like, it's all anybody in the energy world is talking about is how incredible the wind and solar boom is here. I didn't look at it like in the last couple of days, but virtually every other day I've looked at it. The amount of renewable energy on the grid here is 60 to 70%. It's huge, way bigger than California. It's amazing what's going on here in the fossil fuel capital of the world. And it's because of economics. It's because of entrepreneurs. It's because of technological progress. It's not because the governor is a tree hugger and is really pushing this stuff, right? But it's really helpful and hopeful to see this kind of transformation of our energy system happening here, because this is how we're going to decarbonize, right? This is how we're going to lower the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, is by getting off of fossil fuels. And it's happening here faster than anywhere else in the world virtually, which is an amazing story for Texas and should be more widely known. There's the question of the idea of air conditioning, which is obviously a tool for adapting to a hotter world. I get a little frustrated when a lot of people, not you guys are more sophisticated than that, but in other talks and other places I give, there's some idea is like, well, why do we care about it getting hotter? We just get more people air conditioning and everything's fine. Like, we have a tool for this. We can fix it. We have a technological fix. Well, no. There's 750 million people on the planet that don't even have access to electricity, much less air conditioning. We are not going to air condition the oceans. We are not going to air condition the forests. We are not going to air condition the fields where our crops grow in. Air conditioning is not a magic fix for this, right? A lot of people who, even here in Austin, don't have access to air conditioning or can't afford to run it. There's a lot of complexities around air conditioning that we can talk about if you'd like. And I call, in my book, I call air conditioning this technology of forgetting. Because what air conditioning has allowed us to do is build all these sort of glass and steel buildings that have no windows or windows that don't open, have no natural ventilation systems. And as many of you, I'm sure, in this room know, the history of architecture is full of great examples of how we built buildings in hot climates with ventilation systems that did not require air conditioning, right? And this is just a picture. I just happened to be in India for a talk, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. And this is a sterling example of that kind of architecture and engineering. India is obvious. This is in Jaipur. And India is obviously a very hot place. But this building, though, it's obviously a fancy building, but it's emblematic of the kinds of thinking that is useful in, that was used in hot places, in places like India. This is called the Wind Palace. And all of these windows are sort of kind of pushed out, and all the little squares you see are little open, they're like, you'll see in another picture, they're small spaces to allow wind to go through here. And I was there on a really hot day, and it was really amazing when you go inside. In the inside, there are waterway. This one is covered over, but there are flowing water through the rooms, in many of the rooms, allowing the cooling water to go through to a central fountain. In the middle, there's a fountain that's going, makes the whole courtyard very cool. There's wind that is channeled throughout the building. So you're walking through this building on a hot day, and even though it's a relatively still day, you're still feeling this cooling breeze going through everywhere. That guy you might recognize, but this is in one of those alcoves, and you can see the sort of windscreen thing and the way that they use it to capture wind. There's a lot more of that in the building. Here in Texas, we used to build dog trot houses, right? And these dog trot houses were built with this idea of the central ventilating passageway through the center, and they were oriented to capture the wind. There was a lot of thinking about how we built things to mitigate temperature and to think about temperature in a way that was in relation to nature and to the weather and climate itself. That's why I call AC the technology of forgetting. We don't have to think about that anymore. We just build a building and bolt it on the air conditioning, and we're all good. Obviously, in hot climates, they knew for a very long time things that we're like rediscovering, like, oh, white roofs are a good idea. How interesting, they reflect away light. Maybe we should think about white roofs on our buildings in Austin. Of course, in places like Greece, in Mexico and many other places, they've known this for a very, very long time. Where I live here, they just tore down, and right next to us, our neighbors tore down this like wonderful 1940s 2-bedroom house and built one of the classic Austin McMansions with glass and all that kind of thing. But the thing, and it has like aircraft carrier size air conditioners on the side. I mean, seriously, they're like as big as this room practically. But the crowning irony for me is that like they have a black roof on it. And it's just like, oh my God. I mean, I know it's for like style because black is fashionable, but it's like, this house is emblematic of all of the kinds of design choices you would make if you don't care about the relationship to the natural world. And so we've forgotten a lot about that. And part of what's happening now is the regaining of that. And that has to do not just with buildings, but like how our cities are built, right? There's a thing that many of you all probably here know about, the urban heat island effect, that cities are heat sinks. We have a lot of asphalt, we have a lot of steel, we have a lot of concrete. They can be 10, 15, even 20 degrees hotter than the surrounding area. So part of what cities are doing, who are trying to grapple with this, is more green space, more nature, more less of these sort of asphalt oases, and more softer, more natural surfaces in order to mitigate some of that heat. This is the City Hall in Paris. This is a rendering. I was just in Paris 3 weeks ago giving a talk, and it doesn't quite look like this yet, but Paris is, I think, of all the cities that I've been, is the city that is doing kind of the most to reimagine itself for the 21st century. Doing things like cleaning up the Seine for swimming, which is no Barton Springs, but still, reimagining historic areas like this, bringing a lot more greenery into the city, restricting vehicles. The number of bikes there now compared to last time I was there is amazing. Re-insulating old buildings to make them more, give them better insulation. I think many of you probably heard about the Olympics. There was a controversy about air conditioning. That a lot of the American athletes were like bringing their own air conditioners with them, right? Because they didn't trust the natural ventilation systems that these athletes' quarters had. But they're doing this whole-scale renovation led by a visionary mayor who has been, like, for a decade or more, been on this and pushing this really hard. And it's a great example of kind of what political determination and power can do. Obviously, we all know what this is, and I just show this. You all know this, but in other audiences, when I talk to them, this importance of this public infrastructure for cooling. You go to Barton Springs on a hot day, and it is crowded, right? And for good reason, because it's a wonderful place to be and people want an escape from the heat. But what's important is that it's open to everybody, right? You don't have to be, a tech bro in order to go to Barton Springs and cool off. And we're so blessed with this kind of public infrastructure that allows these kinds of spaces that a lot of cities don't have and are trying to recreate now. And this, final plug, my wife is the director of the Blanton Museum of Art here on campus. And I don't know if you've been over there yet and seen this, but, and this had nothing to do with me. This is not my doing, my influence at all. But they've really reimagined the plaza in front of the museum, which used to be like this frying pan, like it was just like concrete and a couple of scraggly trees, and it was like, you check your will and make sure it's written before you try to cross it on a hot day, right? And they reimagined it entirely and they did a bunch of things, a lot of greenery and vegetation and all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that you see when you're driving on MLK, if you walk over there, are these petals, which are amazing. They're done by a firm called Snowetta. They are beautiful. Sorry?
They're alums of BTS.
Yes, absolutely. They are beautiful. They are effective. They create this sort of dappled shade with these the little holes in it that makes you feel like you're in a forest. I mean, it's really lovely. You go there on hot, and they're also made of some kind of a material, some aircrafty kind of material, some kind of graphite something that actually kind of doesn't radiate heat, right? They're specifically designed to stay cool even on hot days. So even on the days when it's 110 degrees, you can go out and touch one of those and it feels cool. Not because there's any kind of refrigerant or anything. It's just whatever the material is, it doesn't absorb heat very much. So it's amazing. So what I love about it is not that it has anything to do with me personally, but it's a great example of how you can take these sort of awful public spaces and, if you think differently about them, not only make them cooler and more useful, but more beautiful, more hospitable. You go there now on a hot day and there's like 100 people doing Instagram things and stuff in front of them, and and people hang out there. They bring their lunch there even on hot days. And before, you couldn't even find a cat out there, right? It was so hot. So I think that, Austin is full of these amazing examples, Barton Springs, this, and other things that are sort of showing the way forward. But we still have a very long way to go. And with that, I will end this more or less on time. And now happy to be more informal and take whatever kind of questions and talk about any aspect of any of this, from book writing to city building to, Goldilocks zone or whatever you want.